Hello students, this is Mrs. Marty, and this is an in-depth review of argumentative essay writing that includes an example essay with the different parts of the essay broken down. So if you may have watched the first video and realized that you were still a little confused and now you're watching this one, or maybe you just skip directly to this one, that's fine. The first video includes the basics, so if you're confused after this one, you may want to go back and watch that one. All right, so the argumentative thesis statement is your claim, and it needs to be debatable. So in other words, it's not factual, it's opinion-based, but it's written as if it is fact, and you'll see how that comes into play in the example. Some sample argumentative thesis statements says something should be done on media bias. Now, so we're going to say the sources were about the media being biased towards one topic or another. And if your example claim or thesis statement is something should be done on media bias, then this is not effective because it does not state the writer's idea, and the writer is you. So if you're trying to persuade someone that something should be done on media bias, then you need to state what is that thing that should be done. It needs to be a little more clear. Another sample, CNN is the best TV channel. Now, I know none of you probably believe that, but again, it is not debatable. It involves no personal choice or preference. So it is not a good thesis statement or a claim. It does not have a pro or con side. It just says it's best. It doesn't say why. There's nothing debatable about this. Another one. There are 3 ways of media censorship. Censorship is when they ban something or someone, and it's not argumentative because what would the reader would expect then would for you to present 3 ways, which would not persuade the reader, but it would give information. So this would be more leaning towards an informational or an expository thesis statement because it's not debatable, it's just giving information. So then we have this one. Newspapers should not identify people by color, race, or religious faith in any way. So sometimes you may look at a newspaper, a news article, and it says a 45-year-old white man or a 36-year-old Latino woman. This thesis statement, it just says that newspapers should not identify people by their color, their race, or their religion in any way. And this is the thesis statement or the claim that is most effective of the ones that we've seen because the topic is open to discussion. It's debatable. There are some people who may oppose this and they could give their reasons. So in this, it's very clear what the opinion is and what the paper is going to be about. You're not informing the readers, but you're giving an opinion, an argument, something that's up for debate, and that's why this would be the best one so far. So overall, when writing your argumentative claim or your thesis statement, make sure that make sure that the topic is debatable. Make sure that your claim and stance that's not written correctly, as strong as possible, is written as strong as possible, and that the reader understands that your aim is to persuade them, not to inform them. And on that stance, you have to take a side in this type of paper. You can't say, I agree with both, because that's not going to persuade anyone to your idea. So make sure your stance is clear. in order to strengthen your argument, you're going to need to base your argument on sound evidence. This is what we call logos. So you're going to support your argument with information from the sources that you're provided on the FSA in this case, or in class. And those need to be facts. They can be examples. They can be testimony, like from expert witnesses or authority, or it can be statistics. Okay, so make sure that you have some of this type of evidence in your argument. So if you're unsure, you have some definitions here of facts, and you can read through that. And examples, you should have enough examples to prove your case. Presenting one fact on something is not going to convince someone. Think about the scenario that I asked you to write, trying to persuade your parents about something. If you just say one reason, they're less likely to change their minds. Same way in your paper. You want to present as much information as possible to persuade the reader to your side. Your opinions of experts, you will need that as well. Now, when it comes to the counter argument, I go over this a lot more in the first video, so you can always pull that up and forward to the part on counter arguments. But what it does is it shows that you have a deep understanding of the issue. So it makes you more credible to your audience, more open for them to maybe be persuaded to agree with you, because you're not closed-minded. You're not saying there's only one way and only my way is right. You're saying, I acknowledge that there is another side, that there is another argument. So let me tell you why that side is not valid and my side is. So to generate your counter argument, some things you may want to think about. How strong is the opposition? What are the arguments that might be used against you in your thesis statement? How can you refute, or how can you come back against those arguments? Will you have to agree with some of the opposition's points? Which of the arguments from the opposition, or which of your arguments might the opposition try to discredit, or what is your weakest argument? And then how closely does your audience identify with your argument versus your opposition? And do you see any weak links in the opposition or the opposing side's thinking that you could take advantage of? So the way that I suggest you do this while you're reading through the sources is to create a pro-con chart. And this will not only help you decide which side you want to take a stance on, but when it comes to your opposing side and writing that counter argument paragraph, then you will already have the information in front of you. Okay. So here's an example of what a pro-con argument may look like. It looks like a lot of writing or typing, but the more information that you have in this chart, the less you will have to go back and search through the documents to say, where did I find that information? I know that I saw it somewhere. So if you put it here, or if you don't want to put this much information, another is to write it, not so lengthy, but then make a note of where you found it so you can go back to it easily, like source 1, 5th paragraph, source 3, 1st paragraph, whatever it may be. Then at least you know where to go back and look for that pro or that counter argument. So sometimes it's difficult to anticipate what your counter arguments might be, and some strategies you can use if you're having difficulty. If you've looked at the pro-con chart and you're like, I'm just not sure, this isn't real clear what my opposition might say. If you haven't created that pro-con chart, then you're going to need to read through there, because you're going to find some opposition in those. If you have created that pro-con chart, then use the evidence from the side of the chart that you're not using in your argument. So if you're choosing the pro side in your argument as your claim, then look to the con side for those opposing and counter arguments. You're going to want to consider what your thesis or your claim is and what your supporting arguments are, and then think, how would people object to each of these? So if you think about it from the other person's point of view and play, like you're in a debate and say, okay, well, what might someone say opposite to each of my points? That can help you with your counter arguments. It's very important that you refute the counter arguments. If you don't refute, or what's sometimes called a rebuttal against the counter arguments, then it makes your opposing or the opposition's viewpoint seem just as valid as yours. So it's important that you come back after you present that counterclaim, a counter argument, and refute it and say why it's not valid. Okay, so there are a few ways to do this. One way to do it is to say that the counter argument or your opposition's viewpoint is incorrect. And you can say how their reasoning is wrong, like it's based on incorrect or misleading information. And if you know what that misleading information is because you have it in your sources, then you're going to want to include that to make your argument stronger. You can say that it's irrelevant. So you can show that it's inappropriate or it's unrelated because it's not relevant to the key point of your argument, and say why. You can also say that it's insufficient, meaning it's not enough. Okay, it's weak, it's based on insufficient information, there's not enough information, or maybe it just ignores some really important information. Okay, so you can exploit your opposing viewpoints this way and refute the counter arguments with these three pieces. Now, I'm not going to read through this. I'm going to present it to you. Here is an example counterclaim rebuttal paragraph. So in the beginning, this is the counterclaim. So this is what the opposing side would say. And you can see it says, some may argue that. Okay, and there's many ways you can word that. You could say others might agree that, or others may disagree with this and say this. Okay, so this is the counterclaim rebuttal paragraph, and this is the main counterclaim, meaning this is what the opposition or the opposing side might say against my argument. And here's where your rebuttal would start. And in the other shorter videos that I post, I give some sentence stems, some starters as to how you can start this rebuttal. And so again, you can always go back and play that one and fast forward to that slide. So you can say something like that. However, this is an immature claim because rivalry is unfair. And it's important that you always explain, because if you just make that one point, that's not enough to convince someone of anything. You need to make sure you're explaining. Okay? So again, this is proponents. Remember, so this is the side that you're on. So this is continuing that rebuttal. This is coming back and saying, this is why my position is correct. All right? And giving merits. Okay, so the rest of the paragraph is just explaining why you're right and why they're wrong. So you do not want to use a lot of the paragraph to talk about the opposing ideas, because you want to you want to acknowledge that there's another side, but you don't want to make it seem like there's a lot. Otherwise, it seems that maybe your argument is not as strong. Okay. So this document is also in the other video, and I have uploaded or will have uploaded a copy of this outline. You do not have to use it, but I did include a copy of the file so that if you want to print it out and use it while you're writing argumentative essay, you can. or just look over it and keep this in mind. Generally, at this stage, unless it's an honors class, there's only 5 paragraphs. And the 5 paragraphs would be the introduction, your first argument for your position, your second argument for your position, and then you would skip the optional one, go straight to the refutation, which is the counterclaim, and then your conclusion. If you feel like I have 3 very strong arguments for my claim that include that third body paragraph, and that you'll end up with 6 paragraphs instead of 5. But at this point, I would suggest try focusing on 2 arguments for your point, 1 against, and then your conclusion. So, as a reminder, writers of argumentative essays, you have to have a lot of supporting and some opposing ideas to construct your argument, and it can cause some organizational problems. So it's important that you look at the previous slide, open that file, and if you keep your essay organized in that manner, then the reader can stay on track and not get confused. Some common errors might be that maybe the refutation doesn't actually refute the counter argument. In other words, it's irrelevant. So you got to make sure that the points you come back with against your opposing side is relevant. Okay, and so I'm just going to give you like an example here. If the thesis statement says the medium of university education should be Turkish, okay, and then you've got pro, or I'm sorry, con. So the supporters give this information. What this is saying is that this refutation is irrelevant to the counter argument. It doesn't have much to do with that. So it's not very effective. So you need to make sure whatever your refutation is, whatever you come back with against this side is actually spot on, relevant to that particular statement. Okay, it can also be if you try to present the argument that's contradictory to the thesis statement. You don't want to do that. Okay, so you want to make sure whatever you present as your evidence supports your thesis statement or your claim. So some final tips here. Word your thesis or your claim correctly. Make sure that it's thought-provoking and it can be debatable. Make sure you read through your sources. I would make a pro-con chart, organize in an outline like I've provided. You want to think about what objections or what people may think about differently, and then show why your argument is the best. You want to make sure you use logos and logic and evidence to support all your claims. And here starts the example essay, and this is the topic. So here they've started their introduction with a definition. They're going into their facts about it, and then they're giving authorities' opinion, and lastly, okay, they're giving a thesis statement. So I am not reading through all of this, but this is how the outline should be, and you can feel free to take your time and pause and go through it. The first pro paragraph, I'm just going to go here. You can see how they've done that. You can take your time, read it, but your pro paragraph, your topic sentence should always relate back to your claim in your original argument. It should support it. Okay. Then in your pro paragraph 2, same thing. You've got your second reason of support for your claim or your thesis. You've got your evidence and your explanations in here, your citations. Your citations on FSA can be as simple as providing the title of the article, or even just source 1, source 2, or source 3. And then comes the fourth paragraph, which is the third body paragraph, which is the counter counterclaim or the refutation paragraph, and they've given you an example here about this is the counterclaim. This is where the refutation starts showing a weakness. This, to make it really good, you can provide another opposing claim, but you do not have to. You can just do one, all right? But you always want to end with why your argument is better than the counterclaim argument. And lastly would be the conclusion, where you're summarizing your main points and linking back to the thesis. You might want to give an authority's opinion or give your audience something to think about. You know, is there something that they can do on whatever this topic is? But you want to leave them with something to think about. In this case, they used a warning. Some people use a call to action, and some people just try to wrap it up with some thought-provoking statement based on their topic.